What movie theater's not letting you bring in snacks? Most of them are letting you do that now. And if they're not letting you do that, just get creative, okay? It's not that hard to see something.
Hello, and welcome to the Cup of Tea Critiques podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Chasen, and like always, I'll be joined today by the team that brings you cupofteacritiques.com. Here, we'll dive deep into the productions and topics we broach on our website, so you can decide for yourself if they're your cup of tea. Ready for a deep look with a deep brew? This week's topic: should streaming productions be considered for picture Oscars? Cup of Tea Critiques is a family affair, and I'm here with my brother Chris, my mother Reba, and my father Terry.
We looked at several pieces of information. We looked at a Variety article that kind of introduced this topic on whether or not streamers should be considered for picture Oscars. And we also looked at Michael Bologna's The Town, which is a podcast The Town, on The Ringer, and where he interviewed James Cameron, who has very strong feelings on this issue. And we read a recent article about Netflix, which is quite relevant to this, Netflix recent buyout, very recent buyout, I mean, as of yesterday, very recent buyout of Warner Brothers. And interestingly, when talks were still in negotiation, Cameron was actually commenting on that and how he feels that it was a bad idea for Netflix to take over Warner Brothers because they were just not the right company to do it because they're a streaming company versus a traditional movie company, essentially. And so that's where we're drawing our information from. And I was taken aback to learn that there are some in the industry, some influential people in the industry who feel very strongly that movies that are streamed on platforms like, Netflix, Hulu, AMC, and such should not qualify for picture nods. They should not qualify for like Best Picture and other nominations around picture, Best Actor, Best Actress, etc. And I was very surprised and disappointed by that because to me it just seemed like an intentional form of marginalization. Like they were intentionally trying to push, this level of movie making to the periphery. And so I thought maybe it would be a good chance to talk about this. I'll get perhaps you guys take on this. James Cameron is probably the most vocal speaker on this issue, in that he essentially feels that this should be movies that are big time films, magical, big fantastical, big screen films that should qualify for Oscars, and the ones that stream are not. And so I just wanted to see how you guys felt about this.
Well, I tell you, I totally disagreed with him. I don't think someone's work should be excluded because it was not a mass theatrical release. Now, as I was mentioning to you briefly earlier, maybe you want to categorize them differently. I might be okay with that, but I don't think they should be excluded from the Academy Awards just because they're on a streaming platform and not some huge or wide theatrical release. And I really disagree with him on the notion that this goes to the life of cinema, like people are going to instantly stop going to the theaters. We have several streaming services that we watch content on. We still go to the movies. That's still an experience, a thing that we participate in. It's an experience we want. So I don't think people are not going to the theater because there's the opportunity to watch something streaming.
They already have, though. That's been a trend for a while. The theater movie attendance has gone down, and more people are watching stuff from home, and a lot of the studios are choosing to bypass the theater process entirely and just go straight to streaming on stuff. I think they go hand in hand in a sense. They're just they're cutting theaters out of it a little bit.
You know what? My thing is, I don't like what I see coming out in the theaters. I think that has more to do with it than the fact that people are opting for streaming instead of theater. I think they're doing it partly because some of the crap that's coming out in the theater right now. It is really slim pickings as far as I'm concerned. I don't know, I want to speak for your mother, but there's few things that we want to go see because it's like, yeah, really?
I don't think that's why theater going has gone down, though. I think first of all, I think there are a number of reasons why theater going has declined. Not to digress too much. Theater going, though, has declined, one, because of the expense of going to the movies. That's one.
Yeah.
Another is streaming is available, and it does make it easy to have, for a family to share in that time of watching a movie together. Why not do it cheaply in the comfort of your home and pop your popcorn, in your own microwave or in your own popper? Variety article, Stellan Skarsgård largely agrees with James Cameron that streaming films should not qualify for picture Oscars. And he says without cinema, there is no streaming. So in other words, streaming is dependent on cinema. And I'm not quite sure what he meant by that, only that it didn't quite make sense to me. But I thought that was a pretty weak justification for excluding streaming films from the Oscars.
I strongly disagree with them for a number of reasons. Like you, Dad, I agree that maybe you need to add more categories where they are streaming specific and try and have some separation from there. But regardless, I don't like the idea that from their perspective, I'm gleaning that they don't want them to have a shot at Best Picture or whatever because they came from streaming. And that's just dumb to me. That does not register for myself. I never liked the idea of being exclusionary.
Yeah.
Netflix, by the way, has been around for almost 30 years. So it's very interesting that nearly 30 years into its existence, they're like, by the way, we still want you to sit on the sidelines. They've built this company in such a way that's allowed them to now create their own content, make their own productions. Why is it that you're now saying that they don't deserve a seat at the table? That doesn't work for me. And lastly, I'll say this. When they start doing this, it feels like their intent is to exclude one particular body, but the fallout is going to be a lot worse than that. I question this because people that have created smaller productions, I feel, may end up being collateral damage. And given that smaller budget films, the lesser known directors and production companies, as well as some actors that get their opportunities in these productions now will not be able to reap the benefits of their hard work and get the recognition they deserve that may help launch their careers. Mm-hmm. That's why I don't like this at all.
What did you think of his points in that podcast clip though? Because I felt I disagree with his overall premise, but I do think it's not worth what you lose in these smaller projects and these lesser known filmmakers missing out on possible recognition for something great that they invested a lot of, even if it wasn't a lot of money, they put a lot of work into and a lot of creative vision into. So I disagree with his overall premise, but I understand some of the smaller things he was saying. And I feel like his perspective, and he said in this podcast clip essentially that he alluded to referring to sci-fi and fantasy type projects, mm-hmm. and that that's clearly to me where his passion lies. That's the kind of movies he's generally done. And so I think that's influencing his perspective more than the overall landscape. And he kind of alluded to that, rather than just indie or drama. He's talking specifically about, I think, sci-fi and fantasy. And he just thinks that if you, eventually a lot of filmmakers, that gravitate to that style aren't really they're not going to engage with, the types of technology and the types of, they're not going to make the kind of products that or produce the kind of filmmaking that he is. So I think he's worried about his genre being minimized and eventually dying. And then in a larger sense, theaters kind of going with it, which theater attendance has gone down. less people are going to the theater. And we say it's, the movies aren't that good, but it's like some of the movies that would be good and would attract you to the theater are not going to the theater, though. And it's not always a money issue. Sometimes they're just bypassing theaters. And so, I mean, out here, the theater on the UCLA campus closed down. I mean, it at this point, it's probably just, it wasn't enough for the upkeep, but people aren't going, if they're not going on a college campus, they're probably not going anywhere, right? So I think that it's I don't know if it's debatable that theater attendance has gone down. It objectively has, and I think theaters are suffering by and large. And so I don't like his overall premise of these smaller projects can't get recognition unless they're doing these 2,000 theatrical runs. I don't agree with that overall premise, but I understand some of the points he was making when he discussed it in that interview.
It costs so dang much for people to attend movies nowadays. I bet a great majority of people have stopped buying snacks and such and gone to some of their local discount places to get those snacks and smuggle them in because it's just so dang blasted expensive. I mean, the group of 4 snacks alone are over $100. And given that tickets are at least $10 a pop, depending on where you're going, and upwards of nearly $30, depending on if you're going into like IMAX or 40X, and then, others. So that really is about a $200 trip. The cost has been ridiculous, and that is why streaming even has an avenue to win here. Even if they were to take streaming out of the mix, though, I don't foresee a giant jump back to 1.3 billion people going to see films. It's just too expensive.
Yeah, the concessions are ridiculous. And for the two of us, it's easily more than double what the ticket costs. And we're not talking about getting goo gobs of snacks. We're talking about a hot dog, a small popcorn, a large icy, and maybe nachos for 2 people.
Let me help you with this. I just went to McDonald's on my way in because I needed to eat something before we got started. I got a fish meal for under $9. So that was the sandwich, the drink, and the fries. $9. The hot dog and water combo is $16 at some of the local theaters.
Yeah. Yep.
That doesn't include if I wanted something sugary. That doesn't include how much it jumps up if I decide to do a fountain beverage. Heaven help me if I wanted a second hot dog. And I didn't even tell you what the ticket price was.
Yeah.
So
this all flies.
That's almost double in price for.
This all flies directly in the face of what we were saying on the last episode about you were jumping up and down, stomping for 40X and Cosm and 3D and 4D and 5D and 6D. And you want every dang on dimension possible. To watch a movie in.
I'm waiting
now
on
you're sitting
18.
here telling me. Now you're sitting here telling me it's too expensive. You're going for the most expensive things. What movie theater's not letting you bring in snacks? Most of them are letting you do that now. And if they're not letting you do that, just get creative, okay? It's not that hard to
To your point, Chris, yes. I personally choose to go try and check out whatever experiences that I can go to. But if I go as a family of 4, I am trying to find out if there's matinee pricing. I'm trying to find a second run theater. I'm trying to find a Dollar Tree to try and mitigate the expense because it's just so exorbitant for that larger group compared to me choosing an experience for myself.
Okay, well, I get there are Dollar Trees and there are matinee prices, but I'm with you on the second run theaters though, and discount theaters. I think a lot of those are the kind of first to go away, and I think it'd be great if those came back. But if theater attendance is still down, there's really no avenue for those kinds of movie theaters to become prominent again. I don't think.
Just to clarify for our audience, so we all watched the Ringer podcast, and on that podcast was an interview with James Cameron, an interview with Matthew Belloni, The Town with Matthew Belloni. He did a wonderful interview with James Cameron on this topic, a full half hour. Strongly recommend you see it, you listen to it. and it will be in the show notes. We will have a link to it in the show notes. But he talked about how films should be in 2,000 theaters before they qualify for an Oscar nod. 2,000, I mean, that is a really high bar. It's not a high bar for the kinds of films that James Cameron does, because he does these big sci-fi elaborate films like the Avatars and such. So it's not a high bar for him, but it certainly is a high bar for not just films that stream, but films in the indie sector, which many of these films that stream are. And so to put that kind of, in my view, insurmountable weight on these films, on the kind of budgets that these films typically get, I think is pretty unfair. It also essentially makes them arbiters of the art. They are making a decision about what constitutes art, because implicit in their statements is that these films that stream, dilute the art. And I think that's I think it's a lot unfair. Who are we to decide what constitutes art, what constitutes a great story? And so that's one other issue I should say that I have with this position. Obviously, he's entitled to it. Of course, but I think if he stepped back for a bit and realized what he is essentially doing, I think he might. I would love for him to think a little bit more about that.
Yeah. Well, I agree with everything he said, actually. But I think I would love to hear somebody with the success he's had and with I would just guess the resources he has, say, how can I personally, what proactive thing can I do to preserve this genre and to aid filmmakers less fortunate or less well known than who don't have the cachet that I do, but are interested in the same types of projects? How can I help them get to the point where maybe they could put their movie in 2,000 theaters? I think to say, well, the Oscars should just, kick them out of the group it's problematic, because it's already kind of an award ceremony that's susceptible, I think, to campaigning and juking the stats and cooking the books a little bit. So I feel like this pushes it more in the direction of where some people argue it is already too much in. Yeah. And so I think that's really the big issue I have with it. But so I guess, yeah, that's what I would say to anyone who's concerned about the theater experience or the preserving the genre, would just assist people who don't have the same ability to make those kinds of projects that he does.
I 100% agree with you, bro. 100%. Mom, when you were talking there, you talked about how he's worried about diluting, and two things came to mind. Number one is, where was this argument when before streaming there was the push to just rush everything to DVD, Blu-ray? Yeah. I mean, there were things that were being in theaters for like a week, and they're like, you can buy it in 2 weeks. Like, additionally, there have always been low-budget productions in this genre and others. You're worried about your competition? Then just be better than your competition. That's what we would tell all the people in sports. So I say the same thing for the people in entertainment. If you want to win the award, then put forth something that is worthy of the award. And if somebody did something better than you, tip your cap and make your next production.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, if they're, as undeserving or unworthy as he's claiming, they'll float to the bottom anyway when it comes to the voting for the picture category. Yeah. But I like what you did, Reeves, in the newsletter where you talked about Robert Redford and his promotion of indies. It's too bad that we don't have him around to hear what his take would be on this argument, because he spent a lot of time promoting the indie industry with Sundance and all. So I'm almost sure he'd have a different opinion on that.
Oh, there's no doubt at all about it. He dedicated more than half of his career to, as Chris said, supporting the indie sector.
Yeah.
Chris, from your response, I kind of get the sense that you understand his point of view, And while you may not agree, you also don't as strongly disagree. Am I reading that correctly, or do you have a firm stance on where you sit on this?
I just think it's important to communicate the perspective properly rather than put someone's opinion entirely in one box or another. And I even felt like the Variety article with the headline tried to kind of like pit Joel Edgerton and James Cameron as if they were like diametrically opposed, and like Joel Edgerton, was slamming him or something like that. And I just feel like what I first thought when I heard that of James Cameron's opinion was I softened a little after I actually listened to him talk on the podcast. And I feel like, when we're talking about the way people react to statements and opinions, it's there's a headline slant to it where we just go with this very strong, and people want to act like James Cameron is out here throwing rocks at every independent production. I didn't get the sense after listening to him speak that that's what he was doing. I think his solution is maybe a little hard-handed, but I understand his perspective, and I can empathize with someone saying like, this is the kind of cinema I love, and I would love to see it continued, and I would love to see this theatrical experience continued, and I would love to see people go back to the movies. And those are all things that I frankly also, I'm not a huge sci-fi fan, but other than that, like, I agree with everything he said, and I understand everything I understand everything he was saying. I just don't think you can cut people out of the picture just because, they didn't, it rings hollow for somebody who has a private movie theater on their own property, talking about what other filmmakers should do. So I disagree with.
Why not articulate it that way, though? Why not articulate it that way? Because he said, and I may not be quoting him exactly, but what he said, it's a shame that the indies have co-opted the Oscars. And that is what the term he used was co-opted. The streamers, he probably said streamers instead of indies, have co-opted the Oscars. Because when he's talking about streamers, he's talking about independent films. I tend to think he's using, you don't think so?
No.
Okay,
no,
so maybe I'm conflating the two?
I think hearing that, I didn't remember that specific sentence, but I think he's talking about the services.
Okay,
I absolutely think he's talking about the services, not the projects themselves.
Yeah, to me they are one and the same. I mean, A24, for example, came up, and he wasn't as harshly, and he wasn't as critical of A24, except to say that because A24 films tend to be released in local markets. Mm-hmm. They tend to be released in local markets, so he's of the opinion that, they shouldn't qualify either. They are not on 2,000 theaters, those films. But I think about, as I said in the newsletter, I think about We Live in Time. We Live in Time was a wonderful film with Florence Pugh and Andrew Garfield. It was an absolutely wonderful film, wonderful story, beautiful acting. And that movie was in theaters. And granted, it probably wasn't in 2,000 theaters, but in the major markets, as, the Oscars insisted it should be. But it was a wonderful film that, in my view, should have been looked at as a possible Oscar. But because of politics, or it didn't meet certain Oscar qualifications in terms of its theater run, it didn't have a chance. That doesn't change the fact that it was a wonderful film that deserved being looked at. I think also about Fair Play. I mentioned this as well in the newsletter. I don't know how many people have seen Fair Play. A lot of people might not have even heard of it. It's a powerful film, very well acted, directed by Chloe Domont, a newcomer. She's an indie director who did this wonderful, wonderful film that aired on Netflix. It's a streaming film. It went straight to streaming. Yeah. That film, in my view, should have been nominated somewhere in the Oscar categories. And so I just think you can't just dismiss things outright because of, as I said in the newsletter, because of the address where it was crafted. You just can't do that. It is the equivalent, in my view, and I may be stretching it a bit, of saying that you can't pay attention to somebody because of where they grew up. It is the equivalent of that. You cannot say that their art is bad because they grew up over here instead of over there. I think that is a very dangerous place to go. And it is an intentional effort to marginalize people, to literally push them and their art to the periphery and to only privilege certain kinds of art. The art that the most influential people in the industry, in this case, deem worthy of those privileges. That's problematic.
Yeah.
Well, the only thing I'll push back on is the notion that he's saying art is bad if it's not released in 2,000 theaters. I don't think that's what he's saying. For this awards recognition, for this particular award recognition, that's what it should be for. And I don't think that's the same as saying this movie's bad, that this art is bad. I don't feel like that's what he was saying.
I think it essentially is. He's not using those words, but that is the effect of what he is doing. You're saying that picture isn't good enough.
For even being considered.
For even being considered for it, to Terry's point.
Yeah, but I feel like you, Mom. I feel like that's implied by what he said.
Yeah.
Even if it's not what he's directly saying, I think that people will glean. I'm not saying that he even intentionally is saying that, but I am saying that for those that are going to read it, it is the unintended consequence of reading those statements, is that they're going to conclude that. And they say perception is reality, and that's the kind of perception he's creating, even if it's unintentional. I had two other things real quick I wanted to get through before I forget anyways. I wanted to go back to something that was said earlier about, I think, Dad, you said this, where about these movies going straight to streaming and that being a problem. And I think if that's a concern, I think it's incumbent upon the people in the industry, actors, directors alike, to make sure there's something in their contracts to guarantee that these things have a run in theaters if that's what they ultimately want. And the reason why I say that is I think back to, again, this was during COVID, but I remember the struggle between Disney, Marvel, and Scarlett Johansson when Black Widow was put straight to streaming. And she did this entire production under the idea it was going to theaters, and that was one of the first conflicts I remember seeing. And I don't want to say I land on one side versus the other, but I do believe that because of situations like that existing, it is incumbent upon the talent on all fronts to make sure that if that's what they want it in theaters, that it's in their contracts to ensure that they're protected against something being rushed off to streaming as opposed to the way they intend.
I feel like we're limiting the movies James Cameron talked about to lesser known filmmakers or lesser known projects or projects with limited budgets. And I don't think that's all he's talking about. I think there's plenty of projects they could have released them in theaters. They cut theaters out. They went straight to streaming, and that's what they chose to do. It wasn't a matter of they had to. It wasn't a matter of. So I think he should give more consideration to the types of projects we're talking about, but I don't think that's the whole pot.
I think it's really important to understand that when you are an influential person, like a James Cameron and other people who have been filmmakers for a long, long time and have had huge success doing the kind of work that they've done, I think someone in that position needs to realize that their words matter. That's what I'm trying to get at. They need to realize that their words matter. They should be careful about just saying anything they want to say. And I know some people will come back and say, oh, I have a right to say anything I want to say too, but I disagree with that. I think when you are an influential person, when you can have tremendous influence over decision making in an industry, as, you know, Camerons and it's the James Camerons and
Scorsese's,
you know, those guys, all those guys and heads of studios and all of that stuff, they should be careful about what they say in public and how they say it. And so if they're saying something that says streamers shouldn't be allowed on the Oscar stage, they shouldn't be nominated, it is problematic because us lowly people, our read of that is going to be, okay, you don't want us there. That is going to be the takeaway, Chris. That may not be your takeaway, and to some degree, that is the risk you take when you are an influential person making a statement like that.
And if you never say it, you're just going to have that opinion forever. If he says it, we can have a discussion about it, and he can hear his peers talk about it, and he can go, oh, maybe I think a little different now. That's
the ripple effect of sentiments and statements like this when it comes from people in the industry who can have an impact on decision making, who can have an impact on indie directors, producers, and actors who want to, as he did, gradually make their footprint in the industry. If you have somebody at the top who, rather than doing things to support you, instead makes statements like these, essentially telling you don't belong here, that's wounding. That is wounding. And that is what I wanted. That is the gist of what I wanted to get at today. It was not everybody's entitled to their opinion, including Cameron's. But when you have people in those kinds of positions making statements like that, it's extremely problematic. It's troubling.
My interpretation of streamers is the services themselves. Netflix is worth $430 billion. So like the notion that they're this champion of the people, I don't agree with. He's criticizing multi-$100 billion corporations. And so I don't view that as punching down necessarily. The guardrail that he's putting in place, I disagree with. I do not think he's saying you all are bad and unworthy or anything. I think he's saying let's take back a little bit of the power from the streaming services.
Chris, I'm going to ask you directly then, based on your take, do you not also agree that while he may be attacking Netflix and the other, big, expensive companies or whatever, that a byproduct of what he wants would affect the little guy unfairly? And that is also extremely problematic?
Well, one of the little guys is those theaters you were talking about that have gone out of business. So which little guy is we're saying one is the little guy and the other is not.
No, what I'm saying is, when I say little guy in this instance, I'm talking about independent productions that are going through different streaming opportunities in order to be seen. That by his point of view, that means those independent films no longer have a shot. And I'm saying, why is it that, and I understand he's talking about Netflix, but if he got his way, those other productions no longer have a shot at getting these Oscars when they may be just as deserving. It just so happened that they had to use streaming in order to get their product out there. And now he's disenfranchised them.
When you said the power that he wields, I was like, is he changing policy? I don't know that he is necessarily. I don't think the Hollywood Foreign Press is going to adopt this in any respect.
I'm not trying to say that they will.
But they do have rules in place.
My understanding is, based on that interview, Oscars did change their rules regarding what qualifies for Best Picture, as a matter of fact, what qualifies, as a result of these kinds of sentiments.
What did they change them to?
Well, initially it was, I think it was initially 1,000 theaters for 7 days, and they upped it to, in order to be in the Best Picture category, now it has to be, I think 10 days beyond that and another 1,000 theaters or something like that. It's in the rules. There's a link that I have in a newsletter that I'll also include in the show notes. But they upped the requirement as a way of making it difficult. So they didn't say streamers, you can't get in, but they made it difficult for streamers to get in.
Yeah, the article.
That's typically how it's done. That's typically how it's done. They won't put up a sign that says no streamers, you can't get in. They'll just put up roadblocks that says you can't go this way.
It says in the article, Best Picture hopefuls must pair a 1-week qualifying run with a 7-day expansion in 10 of the top 50 U.S. markets within 45 days of the initial release.
Yeah. And streaming indies can't do it. Even A24 films can't do that. So
don't cry for A24 on this one. We'll talk offline. I got something that says don't cry.
Well, A24 fortunately has won awards, but now for January 26th, those are the rules. And I wonder how many A24 films will be nominated as a result of these new rules.
The company was recently evaluated at $3.5 billion. They'll get what they need to do, Mom.
It doesn't matter. No, it's not a money thing, though. It's not a money thing. Will these films pull in the size audiences that can sustain a run that the Oscars demand? Being in 1,000 theaters for 7 days, and then 7 days beyond that being in 1,000 theaters across 10 to 50 U.S. markets. Can those films sustain that kind of run? No, they can't. And so that's not a money thing. That's an audience capture thing. They are not those kinds of films. Indies are not designed that way. They're not fantastical, big science fiction. They're not those kinds of films.
I mean, yeah, you're talking about shows that make, these small indie theater places like, the Angelica.
Yeah, there you go.
In that kind of place. And people go there and they're great films, but they're not 1,000 theaters in 50 markets.
Right.
The last thing that I was trying to say, the Oscars is already an exclusive setting, period end. And all of these films have been, over time, it has taken a lot to get recognized by this committee to even get to the Oscars. As prestigious as the Oscars are, trust their evaluation of the product and that it deserves to be recognized at this setting, no matter where it came from. If the Academy believes that this production is worthy of Best Picture, I don't care if it was in a theater, if it was on streaming, or if I walked down the street. It should be up there, recognized, and let us find out which one truly was the best picture. Thanks so much for listening to the Cup of Tea Critiques podcast. Honestly, we could go on and on like we do at our dinner table, but we appreciate you figuring out your cup of tea along with us. Make sure you rate and follow us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Also, leave a comment and let us know if you think streaming deserves a seat at the Oscars. You can stay in the loop on all things COTC by subscribing on our website at cupofteacritiques.com. You can also find us on Facebook, check out our Instagram at Cup of Tea Critiques, and on Letterboxd at COT Critiques. For Reba, Terry, and Chris, I'm Brandon. We'll see you next week for another Deep Look with the Deep Brew.